Okay. So we will call the meeting to order. The only item on the agenda tonight is a presentation from speakers who asked to address the Board of Health regarding smart meters. We did send out a letter regarding the format for tonight, and we have allotted a total of 1 hour, but as we've done with other venues, we're going to ask each speaker to keep it to a maximum of 5 minutes. The board will not be asking questions or responding tonight in any way to the presentations. We have told you that we will respond to any questions or concerns in writing within 6 weeks. So that's our time frame. And should you have any other questions, I think, Katrina, are there any other issues about this? When we're going out? No. Okay, good. So, who would like to address the board first?
Good evening, Dr. Smith, Dr. Tack, members of the County Board of Health. My name is Weston Blelock. I'm from Woodstock, New York, and I've been active on this issue for about 6 months. I'm going to read a letter that I've included in a packet of information that I gave each one of you. Dr. Smith, this is in reference to the Department of Health hearings on digital meters. In October of 2013, 19 residents of Ulster County spoke before the Ulster County Legislature about the adverse health reactions they are experiencing as a result of having transmitting digital utility meters installed in their homes. In December, the Ulster County Legislature unanimously passed Resolution Number 315. This supports New York State opt-out bills in the Senate, A3379, and Assembly 7799A, giving residents the right to choose whether or not to have these new devices. Each meter emits radio frequency electromagnetic radiation that extends inside and outside the building on which it is installed. Dr. David O. Carpenter, Director of the Institute for Health and the Environment, University at Albany, warns that neither the utilities that are installing these meters on our homes and businesses, nor the companies that manufacture them, have ever done any studies to determine whether they are safe. This is particularly troubling because these meters subject people in the buildings on which they are installed to constant and cumulative radiation exposure. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has classified radio frequency electromagnetic fields as being possibly carcinogenic to humans based on the increased risk for glioma. We ask that the Ulster County Department of Health and Mental Health, which is charged with ensuring that our living spaces are habitable, investigate the safety of these meters. It is our hope that after you have viewed the enclosed documentary, Take Back Your Power, and other information and heard from our other speakers this evening, that you will support our request for hearings on smart meters. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Raji Nevin, and I live in Woodstock, New York. I am someone who has been personally affected by a digital smart meter being installed in my home. Last year, I became very sick and eventually was hospitalized by the effects of this 24/7 pulsing microwave EMF that is emitted by these digital meters. This meter was installed directly on the other side of the wall from where I slept. No one told me it was being installed, and no one told me once it was installed. After 2 months of attempting to communicate with Central Hudson in writing certified return receipt, explaining the urgency of the restoration of our analog meter, due to a household member becoming ill and hospitalized, we did not receive a response, not even a phone call from Central Hudson. After I was hospitalized and told I was then at high risk for a full-blown stroke, my significant other, Steve Romine, informed me that he was not willing to risk the possibility of an even greater health issue arising. Thus, he enacted in self-defense and removed the digital smart meter from our home on May 16th of 2013. The digital meter was replaced with a safe, brand new, zeroed out and calibrated General Electric analog meter, which we videotaped and sent to Central Hudson. The analog meter was working perfectly well. Then on May 20th, 4 days after the analog meter was installed, Central Hudson came to our home with no notice, no phone call, and cut the wires to our house. We've been without electricity since that time. There's a mountain of scientific evidence that we can certainly prove that the amounts of pulsing microwave radio frequency being emitted from these digital meters is well above what is safe limit for human beings. Please begin by simply reading the Bioinitiative Report of 2012, which has been written by 21 PhDs and 10 MDs from all around the world, who have detailed the urgency of lowering the current FCC standards of what they deem to be safe level of protection for human beings. Please also read the entire letter from the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, an international association of physicians and other professionals interested in the clinical aspects of humans and their environment. In this letter, the AAEM calls for the following. This was written in 2012. Immediate caution regarding smart meter installation due to potentially harmful RF exposure. Number 2, accommodation for health considerations regarding EMF and RF exposure, including exposure to wireless smart meter technology. Number 3, independent, non-industry studies to further understand health effects from EMF and RF exposure. Number 4, use of a safer technology, including for these smart meters such as hardwiring, fiber optics, or other non-harmful methods of data transmission. Number 5, recognition that electromagnetic hypersensitivity is a growing problem worldwide. Number 6, consideration and non-industry independent research regarding the quantum effects of EMF and RF on your health. And number 7, understanding and control of this electrical environmental bombardment for the protection of society at large. The third person I want to talk about is Dr. David Carpenter. He's a Harvard Medical School trained physician who headed up the New York State Department of Health for 18 years before becoming Dean of School of Public Health at the University of Albany, where he's currently the director. And he stated, while the specific pathways to cancer are not fully understood, it is scientifically unacceptable to deny the weight of the evidence regarding the increase in cancer causes in humans that were exposed to these high levels of RF microwave radiation. The statement made by industry studies said that there is no established mechanism by which a radio wave could induce an adverse health effect on human tissue other than by heating. This is grossly incorrect, and it reflects a lack of awareness and understanding of the scientific literature on this subject. In more than thousands of studies we have done on low-intensity, high-frequency, non-ionizing radiation, going back at least 50 years, they will show some biological mechanisms of effect that do not involve heating of the tissue. This radiation sends signals to the living tissue that stimulates biochemical changes which can generate various symptoms and may lead to diseases such as cancer. The evidence that this wireless technology is harmful and could become the worst health crisis of our time is abundant and easily accessible. Please note that we are not necessarily advocating the abolishment of EMF and RF technologies, rather the use of common sense and the implementation of the best practices in using these technologies in order to reduce human exposure and the high risk of health hazards. It should be noted that the entire country of Italy, this is not just happening in our area, by the way, it's all over our country and in other countries. They're installing these meters. And people are getting sick all over our country and in other countries from these meters. It should be noted that the entire country of Italy has opted for hardwiring their entire utility system, thereby eliminating health concerns. It should also be noted that the Maine Supreme Judicial Court ruled last year that the Public Utilities Commission had not adequately addressed safety concerns about these utility meters, and when prompted, an investigation was focused primarily on the health risks of these meters. There are other states following this model as well. We urge you, the New York Public Health Department, to please lead the way, to follow the remarkable common sense and courage of those who have followed a path that is safe and acceptable for all concerned. The first step, we think, would be to begin the education and investigation necessary by supporting our request for smart meter hearings. I want to just tell you that these green and blue packets that I gave you, it's imperative to keep in mind that the FCC is made up of physicists and engineers. They are not a health agency. They're the ones who are dictating the quote-unquote standards that are safe. Please review the blue folder that is depicting the inadequacy of the FCC standards, and also review the green folder, which has statements regarding health dangers from smart meters by Dr. David Carpenter, who's a public physician. I thank you very much for your time and consideration of this issue. It's urgent.
Hello, my name is Michelle Hertz and I reside in the town of Rochester. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to the Ulster County Board of Health, and I truly want to thank all of you. In early 2010, I convinced the utility companies to remove the DU meters, digital utility meters, SMART, AMR, ERT, they're all the same, and replace them with analog meters because I learned that the digital utility meters were making me sick. My physical response to the removal of the meters was so profound that I began researching and documenting this terrible problem. Since founding StopSmartMetersNY.org, I have been fielding the desperate calls and emails from citizens across New York and Ulster County who are suffering terribly, just as I had, because digital utility meters were installed on, in, and near their homes. These people have nowhere to turn for help or protection against the bullying utility companies who are forcing DU meters on both knowing and unknowing members of the public. It is beyond a coincidence and disturbing that after the installation of digital utility meters, so many people are suffering from sleep disruptions, insomnia, heart palpitations, ear buzzing, ear ringing, anxiety, and more serious health problems. Dr. Neil Cherry, in his 2002 study titled EMF-EMR Reduces Melatonin in Animals and People, concluded that there is substantial and robust evidence that establish a causal relationship between electromagnetic fields and radiation-reduced melatonin. Therefore, there is a sound scientific basis for concluding that the melatonin mechanism is one of the established mechanisms between very serious health effects and acute and chronic exposure to electromagnetic fields and radiation. I can provide the study for you by mail or by email if that would be helpful. We must have sleep to survive, and this is one of the biggest complaints from people is a problem sleeping once the meters have been installed. Using professional radiation measuring devices, we know that digital utility meters transmit constant pulsing spikes of extreme radio frequency radiation. Much of it is in the microwave range. We have measured these radiation emissions both outside buildings, around the meters, and inside buildings. More alarmingly, where electronic digital utility meters are installed and attached to entire electrical wiring systems, we have measured conducted transient radio frequency radiation on building wiring. This unprecedented pulsed radio frequency exposure is surrounding us in our homes. We have asked the utility companies numerous times for the health and safety testing data for digital utility meters. None has ever been provided. We believe that is because the only testing that was performed was not for health and safety, but rather for accuracy and interference with other appliances. There is absolutely no evidence that digital utility meters were ever tested on homes where it might be combined with faulty electrical problems such as arcing, a possible scenario. Nor was it ever considered that digital utility meters would add an intolerable additional layer of extreme nonstop pulsing radio frequency radiation to already RF-saturated home environments. Presently, some utility companies are claiming that they might offer a safer, non-transmitting digital utility meter as an opt-out. They are claiming these digital utility meters have no radiation emissions, but because these non-transmitting digital utility meters have already been used as replacement meters for customers like me, those of us who have been sickened by these proposed opt-out meters know they are not safe. The safest meter is a purely mechanical analog meter with no electronic components. In light of the numbers of people reporting adverse health symptoms after the installation of digital utility meters and the designation of RF radiation as a Class 2B carcinogen, an immediate investigation by the Ulster County Health Department with the assistance of the New York State Health Department and the CDC is warranted. We still have time before the entire county is covered with this dangerous technology and these illnesses become epidemic. Please help to stop this massive and escalating mistake. In the interim, those who are being harmed have a right to the immediate return of the safest meter available at this time, and that is an analog meter. Thank you very much for your attention to this matter. And just one point I'd like to make, that RF radiation is classified as a Class 2B carcinogen, and in the same category it's been mentioned that so have coffee and pickled vegetables been classified in that same category, and that is only because the chemicals used in the processing of those pickled vegetables and coffee are Class 2B carcinogen, not the coffee or the pickled vegetables themselves. Thank you very, very much.
My name is Catherine Skolarski. I'm a lifelong educator. I taught in New York City at Packard Collegiate Institute for 10 years, and I currently run a wilderness education program in Woodstock. I want to talk a little bit about my own personal experience and also talk to you a little bit about the scientific studies that have been widely published but are not being released to the greater public because of the interference of the great corporate entity that is very, very highly invested in this technology. It's extremely important to keep in mind that these digital meters are a product of an international corporation, that Central Hudson is now owned by Fortis, which is a multinational corporation, and that they have no responsibility for providing us with a healthy product. Their responsibility is to their shareholders to produce a profit. And their profit is currently coming at the expense of the health of many Ulster County residents. I'm a person who had a health crisis as a result of a smart meter being installed in my home, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about that. According to David O. Carpenter, founder of the University of Albany at the School of Public Health, a 2009 study reported consistent associations between the use of mobile or cordless phones and two types of head tumors. The authors found an especially high risk for persons that started using the cell phones or cordless phones before the age of 20. Wireless smart meters, walk-around cordless phones, and cell towers all produce radio frequency microwave radiation in the frequency range of 900 megahertz to 2.5 gigahertz. Any human being in the proximity of these devices is bathed in microwaves. Where wireless smart meters, cordless phones, mobile phones, and wireless routers are present, even the developing embryo is subjected to microwave radiation. The human brain is a highly sensitive electro organ. Our human neurobiology functions as tiny electrical impulses travel from neuron to neuron. This is the latest publication of National Geographic Society. Here's a beautiful little picture of axons and dendrites and the neuroimpulse, which all of you who are physicians know is an electrical impulse. The human brain is run by electrical impulses. The physicians who have studied the frequency of the human brain say that it operates at about 8 hertz. So when you're talking about a cell phone tower like the one that you have there, or a smart meter like the one that was put on the side of my home, you're talking about something that's radiating at a frequency of 900 megahertz to 2.5 gigahertz. 2.5 gigahertz is 2.5 million times greater than the frequency, the natural frequency of the human brain. Just common sense that these beautiful little electrical impulses that run every single impulse, every organ in our body, every wink, every breath, every sigh, is monitored and produced by a tiny electrical impulse that's happening in the brain. And we are now, as human beings, for the first time in our entire evolutionary process, being subjected to radio frequency radiation that is 2.5 million times greater in frequency than the frequency of our own brain. That alone would give us cause to think we better be very, very careful about exposing ourselves to these frequencies before we put these devices outside every home in the nation, before we put cell phone towers next to healthcare facilities, and before we put Wi-Fi monitoring equipment into schools where young developing brains are completely unable to block or protect themselves from those levels of frequency. Many non-industry-funded scientific papers are finding that the delicate neurophysiology of the human brain, nervous system, and organs are adversely affected by the presence of microwave radiation. As a lifelong educator, I am alarmed by the dramatic rise in the numbers of children being diagnosed with learning disabilities, autistic spectrum disorders, and emotional problems. The current statistics tell us that the rate of autism doubles in the world every 5 years. The rate of autism doubles in the world every 5 years. I started teaching 30 years ago. It was very unusual. You'd call the school psychologist when you had children in the classroom who had emotional difficulties, psychological outbursts, nervousness, anxiety, or, as we're now seeing in 5-year-old children, depression. This has now become part of what we accept as educators. I find it unacceptable. I gained earth-shattering insight into these difficulties when I became severely ill because of the electromagnetic radiation in my home that was caused by my own cordless walk-around telephones and the installation without my knowledge or consent of a wireless ERT or smart meter. I experienced devastating sleep disruption, swelling, headaches, unexplained anxiety, and depression. I had been away for 3 months. During that time, the smart meter was installed on my home. I was a perfect guinea pig. I returned home in perfect health, radiant, being out in California eating oranges and walking on the beach. And the night that I came home, my sleep disruption began, my swelling began, my headaches began, and what was the most devastating, in addition to the sleeplessness, which we all know it's very difficult to function without sleep, was that for the first time in my life, at 54 years, I experienced an overwhelming anxiety and flash moments of despair that I could not explain. Because I'm 54 years old and because I know who I am and because I know what I eat and how I exercise, I could immediately identify this was something that was wrong. This is not my human personality. This is not my adolescent struggle. I shudder to think what's happening to 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds and teenagers who are experiencing these same physical effects with no idea of how to cope or no way to identify this. I knew that something was terribly wrong. It took me 6 weeks to discover the cause of these symptoms. While gardening one day, I noticed that a smart meter had been installed on my home, just next to my bedroom window. Many of us have purchased meters so that we can personally measure the amount of microwave radiation that's in our home. We can stand there with our meters and watch the pulsing radiation come out of our homes. The European Union has told us that 10 megawatts per meter squared is considered safe. The measurement outside my bedroom window was 700 megawatts per meter squared. I was in a home on Saturday where an autistic child was sleeping, and the electromagnetic radiation in that child's room was 2,000 megawatts per meter squared. Once the smart meter and my cordless phones were removed from my home, all of my symptoms disappeared. That day, that night, I slept through the night for the first time in 2.5 months. I am compelled to ask the Board of Health to research the adverse effects of electromagnetic frequency and electromagnetic radiation on human beings, especially on children, whose smaller developing brains are much more susceptible to the barrage of this form of dangerous pollution. I'd also like to beg each one of you to think back to 30 years ago when a group of homemakers, housewives, started appealing to their local Board of Health. They lived in a place called Love Canal. Their children were sick, and they were sick, and their husbands were sick, and nobody knew what was going on. The government did not protect them. The corporate entity that deposited toxic waste in their backyard underneath their school didn't protect them because the corporate entity had an investment in getting rid of toxic waste, and the government was failing in its assiduous mandate to protect those people. Those mothers and fathers and children became household names across the world, and we now have a Superfund in the United States that is directly linked to that handful of mothers and fathers and children who said, we are sick. We think we know why, because each one of us in this room has done literally thousands of hours of research. I personally can tell you that in the last 7 months, I have done at least 1,000 hours of research on this subject. We are sick. We're linking this to something in our environment, and we're begging you to understand that this is not the first time that citizens have come forward and said, we have a dangerous toxin in our environments, and we're asking you, as those who are responsible for protecting us, to please do the research on this. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. My name is John Paul Rodier. I live in High Falls, New York. I'm here this evening to simply talk about my experience regarding smart meters or digital utility meters. In October 2013, I moved into an apartment in Rosendale, New York. The first night in my new place, I had trouble sleeping. I was plagued by nightmares and very uncomfortable sensations that caused me to wake up throughout the night. I brushed it off thinking that it may just be stress around transitioning into a new home. The nightmares continued, and I continued to have trouble sleeping. I also started to experience dizziness, along with squeezing type headaches, nausea, difficulty concentrating, and my asthma became exacerbated. After dealing with these symptoms for about a week, as they got progressively worse, I heard a friend talking about smart meters and the effects that they had on her. Before this, I had no idea what they were, and I remained somewhat skeptical after hearing about it. Upon returning to my apartment, I found that there were 2 digital meters attached to my house. I began doing some research, and I started to find people all over the country that were getting sick from these meters and experiencing a lot of the same symptoms that I was. My symptoms continued to get worse. I decided to sleep at a friend's place which didn't have a digital meter, and I found that I was immediately able to sleep through the night. After about a week, I was feeling much better and being convinced, due to multiple conversations with family members that didn't understand what was going on, I was convinced that these meters weren't as problematic as I previously thought. So I decided to stay in my apartment again. Somehow I was convinced that this issue was being blown out of proportion and that maybe it was just a wave of hysteria moving through the country. Upon returning to my apartment, I began to feel all the symptoms again. I tried sleeping in different rooms in my apartment, I slept in the bathroom, tried sleeping in the kitchen and in the middle of my bedroom. Within a few days, I was feeling very sick again. I had terrible headaches, dizziness, and I began dry heaving. I left my apartment at 2 or 3 in the morning because it was unbearable. My life quickly became very unstable. I had no other choice but to break my lease, and I have been staying with friends. As you can imagine, it's been very difficult to find a place to live that doesn't have a digital meter. In fact, my life has completely changed because of these meters. I have difficulty visiting family and friends if there's a digital meter. You know, I have a niece and a nephew, and every time I go to their house, I ask them to turn off the Wi-Fi, I ask them to turn off cordless phones, but they still have a meter. And I can only stay there a few hours, and I feel sick right away. And I'm very concerned about them. And they have, my nephew is 2 months old. So now I've found that I now have sensitivity to Wi-Fi as well. So I'm asking you today to please just take this matter seriously. This technology should have been tested before it has been so widely used on our homes. That's all. Thank you for listening.
Good evening, and thank you for taking the time out. I know everybody could be home in our warm houses, and thank you for taking the time tonight to listen to us. I really appreciate that. My name is Toby Stover. I live in High Falls, and I've been a conscientious customer of Central Hudson for 33 years. In June of 2013, I leased a solar system, and in July, without my knowledge or consent, Central Hudson removed the still functioning mechanical analog meter and installed a GE Itron smart meter on my property. Within 1 week after becoming unusually ill, without explanation, I discovered the meter. I complained to the utility and the PSC, Public Service Commission. Both told me that it was not a smart meter because it is not a two-way meter and that it was perfectly safe. Central Hudson claimed it was essential in order to read the solar system. This is not true. I checked with Sungevity, the solar company, who assured me that their systems work perfectly well with ordinary analog meters. When I demanded that Central Hudson return the analog meter, they told me that analog meters are no longer available and are not being made, which is also false. They told me that if I wanted electricity, I had to take whatever meter they chose to install. There is no law requiring anyone to have a digital utility meter, and mechanical analog meters are approved, yet Central Hudson is installing DU meters, which is digital utility meters, everywhere with no regard for safety, even though there have been thousands of health complaints. All transmitting meters put out high levels of RF radiation coming from the actual meters. DU meters also emit unprecedented levels of electromagnetic pollution known as dirty electricity directly into the home through the existing electrical wiring. This is due to the switching mode power supply, which is a very severe health hazard. In an apparent attempt to get in front of a tsunami of problems they know are coming, Central Hudson has been offering alternative digital meters to customers who have complained. They claim these alternative digital meters have no transmitters and are therefore not associated with radio frequency emissions, even though they say the emissions are safe. But because of the wiring problem, the alternative DU meters are making people just as sick and are therefore unacceptable. Mechanical analog meters are not associated with this problem and are the only acceptable meter. In my own research, I learned that all DU meters or smart meters, whether one-way or two-way, are microwave emitting, high EMF frequency radiating devices, dangerous and incompatible with life. I discovered alarming reports of similar and identical symptoms that I was experiencing. The symptoms were so bad that I, as a 61-year-old, could not bear to live or sleep in my home. I suffered heart palpitations, a resting heart rate of over 100 beats per minute, stinging sensations all over my skin, severe nausea, insomnia, hot flashes, bruises which would not heal, vertigo, and daily migraine headaches. I had no choice but to turn off my electricity and am now suffering and surviving the winter by candlelight with a wood stove. And by the way, the symptoms have gone away, even though I'm freezing. This is a violation in my home and on my property of my right to health, comfort, and safety. Let me give you a brief analogy. Imagine living in a community where a local farm monopoly has been supplying our food to us for over a century. The farm decides that it will no longer be growing any food for us. Instead, we're going to be getting ring-dings from China, and we have to eat them. This will save them a lot of money. We complain, but the farm informs us that if we want food, we'll have to eat ring-dings or we just won't eat. Then imagine trying to eat the ring-dings and getting sick, but being told that they're perfectly healthy and there's no science to prove otherwise. Then so many people complain about ring-dings that the farm now offers us Twinkies as an alternative, but Twinkies make us just as sick. I know this analogy may sound absolutely ridiculous and outrageous, but this is exactly what our electric utility company is doing. My outrage raises the following questions. Do we have rights? How do we exercise our rights? If we feel sick, must we prove it? Do we have the right to say no? Do we have to choose between health and having electricity? Is electricity necessary to our way of life? Do we have the right to be healthy and feel safe in our homes? Who is protecting us? Do we have a right to protect ourselves? Is industry science factual or honest? Where is the real science? Is a smart meter not a smart meter if given another name? Is our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness compromised if we are made sick? Does a global corporate utility company, Fortis, have the right to supersede the rights of U.S. citizens living in the Hudson Valley by imposing their agenda on us? The only remedy is to remove and ban these harmful meters. In Australia, where 100% of the population has smart meters, 67% are concerned about the health effects, and now finally the government is looking into this. Do we have to wait until all of us in New York are sick and covered with digital utility meters before we wake up to a problem? I urge you, the Ulster County Health Department, to do everything within your power to address this critical issue by calling for a comprehensive investigation to understand why so many people are getting sick from DU meters. We must ask for state-level hearings also and demand tests on human health. To my knowledge, this has never been done, although there are ample studies that show the dangers of electromagnetic pollution from DU meters. In the meantime, we must guard our health by instituting an immediate ban or recall to protect ourselves, our children, and future generations. Corporate profits must never trump our human rights. Thank you for taking the time.
I consider this toxic trespass. You know, Central Hudson and in my country in Ireland, the electric company have easement to go on your property and to take a reading on the analog meters. I've never seen digital meters before, but the right of easement, I believe, has been abused now by the fact that the Central Hudson come every 2 months, and a guy drives past in his truck, and he presses a button and he takes a reading. And but these things are and Central Hudson, I contacted Central Hudson, and they totally agreed with me and told me yes, they transmitting some of them every 6 seconds, some of them every 12 seconds. So this is not, Central Hudson don't deny this. And my question is, why do they have to transmit, 24 hours a day if they only need a reading every 2 months? And I found out because it's cheaper. It's much cheaper to have them transmitting. The apparatus required to wake up a meter, it's a perfectly safe way. They used to measure water. They'd wake up the meter, and then they'd measure it, and then it would go back asleep. But it just costs more money to do that, So the other thing I'm interested in is the precautionary principle. These things are, they're not safe. And why have they put them on our homes before there's been any proper testing done on people? Now, I'm an engineer, so I spoke to Central Hudson and I said, how have these things been tested? And they test them on there's a half-hour test, where they test all the readings coming off the meter over a period of a half hour. And they include the times when the meter isn't spiking. And they divide it, and anybody that understands mathematics understands a mean, the average, and the average they use to make it safe. Now that's very, very much like a drive-by shoot at your house. Just for instance, this is just a ridiculous comparison, but it's not so ridiculous you think of it. And he fires in 3 bullets into your home. And somebody tells you that's not dangerous because the other 29 minutes and 59 seconds, he didn't fire any bullets. So it's okay to have those bullets going into your home, So this is a fact. I looked up FCC regulations. There's a half-hour test, and that's what Central Hudson don't do any testing on these. Every time I spoke to the guy for about a half an hour, every time I asked him about the test, he couldn't show any testing. He couldn't show any formulas. There's no results there to show that they're safe. So I went deeper into the FCC regulations. You can look them up. And it says on page 14, at the bottom half of the page, it says that the half-hour test is only suitable under a controlled environment. In other words, in the workplace, the half-hour test, where you go 8 hours a day to work, the 30-minute test can only be used. It's not suitable for where people, inhabit in a housing estate where I live, or a home. So the test at Central Hudson are quoting to make this safe. The FCC standards don't even agree with Central Hudson on this matter. So why am I saying this? Because when I moved in here, I experienced insomnia. Me and my wife were waking up in the middle of the night. We couldn't sleep. I'm wondering why. It wasn't just waking up. We've all suffered sleepless nights. But this was every night at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was so awake, I felt like I just had a cold shower. My wife was the same. She didn't know what was going on. I've lost my sense of smell. I can't smell. And I believe that's down to, a toxic overload from, not just from the Wi-Fi coming in off the meter. There's also the dirty electricity that comes along the into the wire. And my wife has been sick for the last 2 months. The doctor has given her antibiotics. Antibiotics won't take it away. Some of the symptoms she has is terrible bronchial cough. My asthma, I'm on asthma medication every single day. And before I moved into this place with the smart meters, I, from time to time, took an inhaler during the seasons. But now, every day, summer, winter, I have to take very, very serious asthma medication as a result of, and it has to be the meters, because we're a very healthy family. I have 2 children. The last thing I'll just say is the psychological stress of having something on your home that you don't want. And we've got a beautiful home. It's a brand new apartment. I've got the woods out back. You get lost in the woods. It's beautiful, and it's just so sad that we're looking around to move now, because of these meters. But when I went to look at an apartment, it had a smart meter on it in Woodstock, you know. So I urge you, please take this serious. The children are getting sick, you know, adults are getting sick, and the you know, if you follow the money trail, there's billions of dollars being given to utility companies all over the country to put these on people's homes for the sake of technology and for the sake of, you know, saving money. But the last thing I'll say is there's no money being saved. Our bills haven't gone down. Nobody's saving money, you know. So thanks for that. I wasn't planning on talking, but I just wanted to tell you from the perspective of someone that travels a lot, that the only place I feel sick is in my home. Thank you.
Okay.